Okay, let's try to understand through a program what do you mean by checked exception and what do you mean by unchecked exception. Okay, in order to explain this scenario, let me take some requirement. Okay, what is my requirement? Let's say I am having a file over here, resume.txt file. I have some text file is there, okay, where I have written my name, okay, Prasanna. Okay, what is my requirement is there? I have a file is there, okay, where my name is there. Okay, now my requirement is there, I want to read the contents from this file, whatever it is being written inside that file. I want to read this content from this file itself. Okay, so then how can we write the program? Let's try to understand. Okay, class test. Now what I am performing here, what I am doing here, I want to read the contents from this file. Okay, so that means in order to work with exception, how Java people has provided some predefined classes like your runtime exception, throwable class, exception class, SQL exception class, sublet exception class, right? These are nothing but predefined class, right? Similarly, working with the file operation or to perform some file operation. Okay, so Java people has provided some predefined classes again in order to read the contents from this file, or in order to write something to the file like file reader, buffer reader, file writer. Okay, there are a bunch of predefined classes are there. Okay, through which by using those predefined classes you will be able to perform the file operation, right? So that means what is my requirement over here? I want to read this content from this file. Okay, public static void main method, and these file related predefined classes are part of which package? Java.io package. Okay, as part of this Java.io package, they have defined some predefined classes like file reader, buffer reader, okay, file writer. Okay, there are print writer. There are a lot of predefined classes has been provided or in order to perform the file operation. Okay, now my requirement is I want to read the contents from this file. Okay, how can we read the contents from this file? So first of all, we need to place this file information into a file object or not. Okay, so that means I am creating one object called file. F is equals to F new file. Okay, and I need to define the location of this file, where this file it is located. Okay, so that means first of all we need to create a file object by defining this file location. Okay, now once I created this file object, what we need to do? I want to read this file itself or not. How can I read the file? So that is why I need to again create another class object is nothing but file reader. File reader fr is equals to new file reader. Now what this file reader it will do? It will help me to read a file. Which file it will read? That file information you need to pass to this file reader itself or not? You will pass to this file reader this file information through this constructor. Okay. Now by using the file reader you will be able to read the file. Again, if you are using only file reader, you will be able to read only one character after another character. How bulkily how you can able to read a file? So that is why there will be another class is there which is nothing but your buffered reader. Okay, buffered reader br is equal to new buffered reader. Okay, by using this buffered reader you will be able to read this line of content itself. Okay, by using the buffered reader. But if you are using the buffered reader, there is a method called readline method. Okay, br.readline method if we will call. Okay, so then it will read the whole line of this content of this file itself. Okay, so that is why you can use the buffered reader. Okay, now to this buffered reader again what you need to pass? This file reader as part of this constructor. Okay, file reader. Okay, so now by using this buffer reader you will be able to let's say system.out.println of buffer reader dot read line. Okay, now it will read the contents as Prasanna. Now it will print the value here. Okay, in this program here I am trying to read the contents from this file, and this file it is present in which drive? Let's say it is present in the C drive. Okay, now if I try to execute this program, let's say I compile. Okay, first of all, how I can compile here? Javac test.java. Okay, whenever I try to compile, a respected .class file will get generated or not? What is that .class file? Let's say test.class file got generated. Okay, now what I need to do, once I compile the code, I will try to execute. Okay, I will execute Java test. Now if I try to execute, who will come into the picture? Is nothing but your JVM. Now JVM it will comes to which method? It will comes to this main method, and it is trying to it will create a file object with this specified location. It will create a file reader object, it will create a buffer reader object, and by using this buffer reader object it will be able to read the contents from this file itself or not. Let's say your code is working fine. Okay, now what you did, once you compile, the .class file got generated. Now before executing your program, what I did, I moved this file from C drive to the D drive, let's say. Okay, now there is no file in the C drive itself. Okay, I moved into this D drive itself. Okay, now whenever JVM is trying to come to this main method, now as you have written your file f is equal to new file, and you have specified the location here with respect to C drive. Now at this location JVM can able to find this text file? No, right? Because you have moved this file to the another folder, D drive, right? So then you will get some file not found exception itself or not. So that is why compiler will come into the picture. Compiler knows this file not found exception is nothing but it's a checked exception type. Why? Because file not found exception is a child class of exception class, which is nothing but checked exception. So that is why when you are performing some file operation, you cannot compile the code. Okay, you cannot able to compile the code without handling this exception. Which exception? File not found exception. That is why compiler will force you to handle the exception or write the try and catch block. As because of, see, at this particular location there might be a file, there might not be a file. Okay, if file is there, then well and good, it will execute, it will be able to read the file from this, it will read the contents from this file and it will execute. But let's say compiler will think, let's say at this particular location, if the file is not there, then where is your handling code? So that is why compiler will not let you to compile this code. Because why? Because you are performing the file operation, and at the wrong time this file may not found by the JVM, right? There might be a chance JVM can get the file if the file is there in the C drive. But let's say file is not there, then where is the handling code? Who will ask? Compiler. So that is why compiler will force you to handle the exception, or compiler will force you to write this try and catch block. Okay, which exception you are getting? File not found exception. If this respected file is not there and you are not able to read the contents from this file, then do this alternate operation. Let's say I am writing something system.out.println of Mishra, instead of Prasanna, print as a Mishra. Okay, again as you are performing your br.readline, this readline it is throwing the IO exception, so you have to write the catch block of this IO exception as well. As of now I am not writing. This file not found exception is nothing but it's a checked exception. Okay, as you are performing this file operation, compiler will force you to handle this exception. Means you have to write this try and catch block. Okay, until and unless you have not written or you have not handled this exception, file not found exception, compiler will not let you to compile this code. Okay, so you will get the compilation error saying, hey, you need to handle or you need to handle this exception itself. Okay, which exception? File not found exception. Okay.
Okay, so what is the requirement that we have discussed? The requirement is nothing but, let's say I want to read some content from a file, right? So first of all, let me create a file and let me have some content in that file. Okay, so then we will write the code to read the contents from that file. Okay, so first of all, let me create a file, touch. Let's say I'm creating a file called user profile. Okay, so user underscore profile. Okay, so let me write some content in this text file. Okay, let's say I'm writing my name, Prasanna. Okay, now let me write a code to read this file. Okay, so let me take a class called class test. Okay, now let me have a main method, public static void main of string array of args. Okay, so now in order to read the contents from this file, first of all we need to create which class object is nothing but file class object, right? So how we can create the file class object? File f is equals to new file. Okay, and we need to define the file path location. Okay, so where is my file is there, so that file path location we need to define. Okay, so let me copy this file path name. Okay, so now let me paste it. Okay, so now what I did here, I have created this file object, file f is equals to new file. Okay, and I have defined the file path location over here. Okay, now in order to read the file, so which class object again I need to create? Nothing but file reader. Okay, so file reader fr is equals to new file reader of, we need to pass this file object as part of this constructor of this file reader, right? Then we need to create buffer reader br is equals to new buffer reader of, we need to pass that fr object, file reader object, right? So first of all, what we did here, we have created this file object and we are creating the file reader object and passing this file object to this file reader, and we are creating the, so now we are having this buffer reader object. Okay, so now by using this buffer reader object, we will try to read the contents from this file. How? So system dot out dot println of br dot readline method. Okay, now if you'll see here, in order to perform the file operation, all these classes, predefined classes, nothing but file, file reader, buffer reader, each and every classes are now, it is present in which package? Is nothing but java.io package, right? So that is why we need to import here, import java.io.star. Okay, now if you'll see, I have written this piece of code in order to read the contents from this user profile file itself. Okay, now if I'll try to compile my code, okay, so then what will happen? How will be able to compile the code? So the code java c test.java. Okay, now if you'll see, whenever I'm trying to compile this program, okay, so compiler is not allowing me to compile this program. Why? Because it is asking me to handle the exception. Which exception? File not found exception and IO exception. Okay, because both these exceptions are nothing but checked exception. Okay, so that means compiler is forcing me to handle the exception by writing the try and catch block. Okay, so here we need to write the try block, and because of this piece of code you are facing the exception itself or not. So that means this piece of code is nothing but your risky code, right? So this risky code you need to write where? Inside this try block. Okay, and which exception it is throwing? It is throwing nothing but it is throwing file not found exception and IO exception. So you need to write the respective catch block with respect to each and every exception type. Okay, suppose let's say the respective file it is not there in that specified folder or specified location. So then let me print, or let me write alternative solution, system.out.println of, let's say I'm printing here Misra. Okay, similarly we need to also write the catch block with respect to IO exception. IO exception A something, let's say I'm trying to print system.out.println IO exception occurred. Okay, now what I did here, so in order to read the contents from this file, okay, so I have written this program. Okay, but this, because of this piece of code we are getting the file not found exception. We are not getting, but what compiler will think at the run time, maybe this file will not be available in this specified location, right? So then if this file it is not present in this location, so then where is your handling code? How you are going to handle that exception if you are finding the file not found exception or IO exception, right? Now we have written here respective catch block with respect to file not found exception and IO exception. Okay, so now as there is a file it is already there, so now we'll try to compile the code java c test.java. Okay, file not found exception. Java c test.java. Okay, now we need to write here catch block of which exception? File not found exception E. Okay, now let me print something, system.out.println okay, if this file it is not there in this specified location, so then what will happen? It will throw the file not found exception, then this catch block it will catch that file not found exception, and this piece of line it will get execute. Okay, along with this file not found exception also we need to write another catch block with respect to IO exception. Why? Because this br.readline method it is throwing the IO exception. Okay, IO exception E. Now system.out.println of IO exception occurred. Something I'm just printing, some exception message I'm printing. So that means now if you'll see we are performing some file operation over here. So because of this line, what compiler will think? Maybe at the runtime in this specified location, this file may not be there. So if this file it is there, then well and good, it will read this content from this file itself. But let's say in the worst scenario, or let's say this file it is not there and in this specified location, right? So then what will happen? It will throw the file not found exception, right? So then if it will throw the file not found exception, then this respective catch block it will get execute, and this line it will get executed over here. Okay, so let me compile this code now. How we can compile now? Okay, how we can compile now? So java c test.java. okay, now see, I'm able to compile the code itself or not. Now let me execute it. Okay, so it will be successful read this content from this file itself. Okay, but now what I am doing here, I'm trying to delete this file. Okay, I have deleted this file. Okay, now let's say if I'm trying to execute again java test. Okay, no need to compile because I'm not modifying any code over here. Okay, so directly if I'm trying to run, so at the run time JVM, whenever JVM it will come to this file location that I have defined over here. So as already I have deleted this file, so it will throw the file not found exception, right? So if this file not found exception it will get occur, so then this catch block of this file not found exception it will get execute, and this line of statement it will get execute. So that means I'll get the output as Mishra over here. Okay, see, we are getting the output as Mishra. Why? Because we are getting this file not found exception. If I am not handling this exception, file not found exception, as it is a checked exception, so compiler is forcing me to handle the exception. Compiler is not allowing me to compile the code over here itself. Okay, so that is why we need to surround this risky piece of code inside the try block, and if any file not found exception will get occur, so then the respective file not found exception catch block we need to write in order to handle the file not found exception. Okay, so this is nothing but checked exception.
So that is nothing but checked exception. What do you mean by checked exception? Checked exception is nothing but which will be checked by the compiler. Okay, at the compile time itself, at the run time you should not face any exception, that will be checked by the compiler. Okay, it will be checked by the compiler itself. That is nothing but checked exception. What do you mean by unchecked exception? If the exception will occur or exception will not occur, compiler don't know about this. What I mean, suppose let's say I am writing here class test. Okay, public static void main method. Let's say I have defined one method here, public void m1 method, which is taking int x comma int y. Okay, something I'm let's say writing system.out.println of x into y. How can I call this m1 method? So I have to create the test class object itself or not. Test t is equals to new test, then t dot m1 method. While calling this m1 method, I need to pass these two input parameter itself or not. Let's say I am passing 10, 2. So what will be my output here? I will get 10 into 2, which is nothing but 20. If I will pass here t dot m1 of 20, 2. So what will happen? It will give me the 40. T dot m2, can I pass here 30, 0 itself or not? So this x value will be now 30, y value will be 0, and 30 into 0 is nothing but I will get 0. You will not get any compilation error, you will not get any runtime exception also. Okay, but in this m1 method internally, what logic let's say I have written here, instead of multiplication, let's say I am performing the division. Okay, it is so syntactically wise, it is the correct code only or not? It is expecting two integer parameter, you are passing two integer parameter here and here. Okay, and while performing the operation itself, okay, 10, first of all 10, 2 it will come, x value will be 10, 2 you will get output as 5, then 22 it will get the output as 10. Again if you are passing here 30 and 0, x value is nothing but 30, y value is nothing but 0. Okay, so now at this point you will get some arithmetic exception itself or not. So that means compilation, at the compile time itself you will get compilation success. Compiler don't know what input value it will come at the run time. Okay, at the run time, based on the input value, I am performing this business operation, and while performing this business operation it is throwing the exception, which is nothing but arithmetic exception. Okay, so
But what do you mean by unchecked exception over here? So unchecked exception is nothing but compiler will not involve in this case. Okay, for example, if I'm taking one class called class test, let's say I'm taking the main method. Let's say I'm defining one method called public void m1 method, which is taking two parameter, which is nothing but int x comma int y, right? And here inside this m1 method, what logic I'm writing here? System.out.println of x divided by y. Okay, now how can I call this m1 method? So let me create the object test is equals to new test. Now how can I call this method? T.m1 method. Okay, but while calling this m1 method itself, we need to pass the parameter, right? So let's say if I'm passing the parameter as 10 comma 2. Okay, so now I'm passing two parameters. Okay, so let's say I have written this piece of code. Okay, so then my code will get smooth execution itself or not? Okay, Java C, if I'll try to compile my code, okay, Java C test.java here itself. Okay, so that means my code got compiled successfully. Now I am trying to execute Java test, so I will get all this output. So that means here it is nothing but smooth execution program. Okay, but now what I did here, instead of 30/2 I am passing here 30/0. Okay, now if I'll try to compile, so if I'll try to compile now, okay, so will I get any compilation error over here? If I write here Java C test.java, okay, if I'll try to compile, is there any compilation error shall I get here? No, right? Because syntactically my code is correct only. Okay, this 30 is nothing but it is one integer value and 0 is also one integer value. Okay, so this m1 method, it will expect two integer value, so that is why compiler will not give any compilation error over here, right? So that is why we will not get any compilation error. But at the time of execution itself, when I'm trying to execute this program like Java test, then I will get the exception as nothing but arithmetic exception. Okay, so that means it is nothing but unchecked exception. Okay, compiler will not check this exception will occur at the runtime or it will not occur. Okay, so that is nothing but unchecked exception. Based on the user input value at the runtime, you are getting this exception. Okay, which exception? Arithmetic exception only. Okay, so that is nothing but unchecked exception. Okay, so that means what do you mean by checked exception? Checked exception is nothing but the exception which will be checked by the compiler. So that means compiler will force us to handle the exception by writing the try and catch block. But what do you mean by unchecked exception? Unchecked exception is nothing but this exception will not checked by the compiler. Whether you are getting the exception at the runtime or not, that will not be checked by the compiler, or compiler will not force us to handle that exception itself. Okay, but the exception will occur at the runtime only. Okay, so at the runtime you should not face any exception, so compiler will check that exception. That is nothing but checked exception. Okay, but for unchecked exception, compiler will not involve in this case. So compiler will not check whether you are getting any exception or not at the runtime itself. Okay, so that is nothing but checked exception and unchecked exception.
that is nothing but compiler don't know at the runtime which value it will come. So that is why you will get the arithmetic exception. But in this case, compiler knows you are performing the file operation. Compiler already aware of this exception. Which exception? File not found exception. How? Because file not found exception is nothing but extending to the exception class, which is nothing but checked exception. So that is why compiler will force you to handle this exception until and unless you have not written the try and catch block, your compiler, your code will not get compiled. But here, whether you handle the exception or whether you are not handling, means whether you are writing the try catch or you are not writing the try catch, it will give me the exception only. Compiler will not involve in this case, in case of this unchecked exception. Okay, so that means I hope you understood what I mean by checked exception. What do you mean by unchecked exception? Checked exception means the exception which will be checked by the compiler, okay, or compiler will force you to handle the exception by writing the try and catch block. But in case of unchecked exception, compiler will not force you to handle the exception. Okay, that is nothing but unchecked exception. And how can you able to identify whether this respective class is a checked exception or it is not, it is a unchecked exception? If a class is extending to the exception class, that is nothing but checked exception. If a class is extending to the runtime exception, so that is nothing but your unchecked exception. Okay, so that is nothing but checked exception and unchecked exception. Okay, here, okay, one more thing I can tell here. Here, what I am doing here, if you will see, how can I performing this file operation? File f is equals to new file, right? If you, and this file object I am passing to this constructor of this file reader itself or not? What is this file or what is this f? F is equals to this line of code itself or not? So that means f is nothing but this line of code. So that means instead of f, can I replace this line of code instead of this f itself or not? What I mean is, instead of f, as f is equals to this line of code. Okay, so that means instead of f, can I replace this line of code itself or not? So here I can write here new file of text. Okay, so then I can remove this line of code so that I can reduce the line of code. Similarly, this fr is nothing but this whole line of code now. Okay, so instead of fr, I can replace whole line of code itself or not? So instead of this fr, I can write here new file reader slash resume.txt. So that means I can remove this piece of line itself or not? You can remove unnecessary piece of code. Okay. So up to this we have understood what do you mean by exception, okay, and what do you mean by exception handling. Okay, what do you mean by exception? Let's have a quick revision. Okay, what do you mean by exception? Exception is nothing but some exception or some issue due to which your program is getting terminated abnormally. Okay, because of some piece of code your program is getting terminated abnormally, that is nothing but your exception. Okay, and how you are going to handle that exception is nothing but exception handling. Okay, while you are trying to perform or while you are trying to execute your code at the runtime, if any exception occurred, how you are going to handle that exception is nothing but exception handling. Okay, and how we are going to handle this exception? By using the try and catch block. Okay, which piece of code you need to write inside the try block? The risky code you need to write inside the try block. What do you mean by risky code? Because of which piece of code you are facing the exception, that is nothing but risky code. Okay, and that piece of code you need to write inside the try block. Okay, and the respective handling code you need to write inside the catch block. Okay, so handling code, so basically handling code you need to write inside the catch block. So that means by using the try and catch block you need to handle the exception. Okay, then we understood who is the parent class of all the exception class is nothing but throwable. Okay, so throwable is nothing but parent class of all the exception class. Who is the parent class of all the exception class? Who is the parent class of all the classes is nothing but object class. But if anyone is asking who is the parent class of all the exception class, you can answer like throwable. Okay, who is the child class of this throwable class? Exception. For this exception, there are several exception classes are there. Okay, like you are having runtime exception, subnet exception, SQL exception, class not found exception, file not found exception, IO exception. So there are lot of predefined classes are there, and these classes are nothing but the child class of this exception class. Okay, similarly there are some child classes are there also with respect to the runtime exception, which is nothing but null pointer exception, arithmetic exception, class cast exception, array index of bound exception. There are several child classes of this runtime exception classes are there. Okay, so how many types of exceptions are there, which is nothing but checked exception and unchecked exception. How you are going to identify whether a respective class is a checked exception or unchecked exception? Checked exception, how can you identify? If the respective class is a child class of this exception class, is nothing but checked exception. If a class is a directly child class of this runtime exception, that is nothing but unchecked exception. Okay, so what do you mean by checked exception? The exception which will be checked by the compiler is nothing but checked exception, or you can say like compiler will force us to handle the exception by writing the try and catch block, or by surrounding with the try and catch block. That is nothing but checked exception. What do you mean by unchecked exception? Unchecked exception is nothing but the exception which will not checked by the compiler, whether you are handling the exception by using the try and catch block, or you are not handling that exception also, compiler will not query, compiler will not involved in this case, in case of unchecked exception. So that is nothing but checked exception and unchecked exception. Okay, always remember, checked exception will be checked by the compiler, unchecked exception will not checked by the compiler. That does not mean checked exception is a compile time exception. No, exception always occur at the runtime only. At the compile time you will face only compilation error. Okay, compile time error only you will get. Exception will never come at the time of compile time. Okay, exception will occur at the runtime. At the runtime you should not face any exception. That is what checked, that is what compiler will check. Okay, so that is nothing but checked exception. Okay, at the runtime, whether you are handling the exception or you are not handling the exception also, if compiler is not checking, that is nothing but unchecked exception. Okay.